In the kitchen where the evening sun streamed in, Emily Williams was preparing dinner. As the sweet aroma of tomato soup began to fill the room, her hands, still holding the knife, suddenly stopped. Outside the window, an old wooden swing set cast a long shadow in the sunset. It was the last place where Michael had played. The sound of insects announcing the end of summer echoed through the quiet garden. "Mom, can we play at the park again tomorrow?" Those were the last words Michael had spoken before heading to school 5 years ago, and they still rang clear in her ears. Emily let out a deep sigh and gazed at her cell phone screen on the counter. The wallpaper showed her 8-year-old son's smiling face. With his light brown hair and blue eyes inherited from his father, he had always greeted everyone with a friendly smile. Every time she looked at the photo of her child, her heart ached. In the picture, Michael wore his favorite blue striped t-shirt and proudly carried his new red backpack. That day had started like any other morning. Michael boarded the school bus at 7:45 as usual. Emily waved goodbye saying, "Be careful," and watched until he was out of sight. Just before the bus turned the corner, Michael stuck his face out the back window and waved enthusiastically. No one thought it would be their final farewell. At 3 p.m., after school should have ended, Michael hadn't returned home. Emily initially thought he might have stopped by a friend's house, but her anxiety gradually grew. When she called the school to check, they said Michael had left as scheduled. His teacher, Mrs. Brown, said he was energetic in class today. When she contacted the neighbors' houses, no one had seen her son. Emily couldn't control her increasingly rapid heartbeat. As night fell, she filed a missing persons report with the police. The town was soon covered with Michael's photos, and volunteers began searching. Neighbors walked around the area all night with flashlights. The local community radio repeatedly broadcast information about Michael. 3 days later, decisive evidence was found. Blood traces were discovered by a creek about a 15-minute walk from their home. DNA testing confirmed it was undoubtedly her son's blood, and the police declared him deceased. Although no body was found, it was determined to be an accident in the fast-flowing creek. Emily put down the knife and gently stirred the tomato soup. The scent of oregano wafted up. This was Michael's favorite recipe. The clock showed 6 p.m. James would be home soon. Recently, he had been treating her with even more kindness than usual. However, Emily could sense something like guilt within that kindness. 5 years after the accident, she was gradually trying to rebuild her daily life. Teaching flower arrangement classes 3 times a week and discussing flowers with her students provided a small measure of solace. When surrounded by the colors and fragrances of flowers, she felt momentary peace. Every Sunday, they visited James's mother Grace's mansion. The old Western-style house in a quiet Phoenix suburban neighborhood was always surrounded by perfectly maintained gardens. While they maintained harmonious family relations on the surface, Emily constantly felt something was off. Grace always appeared elegant and polite, seeming like an ideal mother-in-law at first glance. Wearing an expensive pearl necklace and with her white hair perfectly styled, she never dropped her dignified demeanor. However, Emily couldn't help feeling uncomfortable with her occasional sharp glances and seemingly sarcastic remarks in casual conversation. James's sister Caitlin also frequently visited her brother's home. Unable to have children of her own, she had grown closer to her parents' home after Michael's disappearance. Recently, she had started living with her mother Grace, spending more time together in that large mansion. Sometimes Emily didn't miss the shadow of complex emotions in Caitlin's eyes. Was it pity, or something else? There seemed to be some unfathomable deep emotion in the way she looked at her sister-in-law. Outside the window, the swing swayed gently in the evening breeze. The rusty hardware made a faint creaking sound. Emily suddenly thought she heard her son's laughter and turned around. But there was no one there, just an empty kitchen and walls tinged with sunset light. She picked up the knife again and continued preparing dinner. Only the sound of chopping tomatoes echoed in the quiet kitchen. Deep in her heart, she still couldn't completely let go of the small hope that Michael would return someday. That prayer had become her daily routine. Past 8 p.m., Emily was finishing up after dinner. James had received a work call and remained secluded in his study. Just as she was beginning to feel the comfort of routine in the warm sensation of washing dishes, her kitchen phone rang, shattering the silence. The number displayed was unfamiliar. Emily hesitated but, thinking it might be work-related, picked up the receiver. "Hello, this is Emily Williams." A moment of silence. Then, that voice came through. "Mom, I'm waiting in the garden." Emily felt the blood drain from her body. That voice was undoubtedly her son's, though slightly lower now. "Michael, is that you?" She could hear her own voice trembling. It felt like her voice was coming from far away. "Yes, Mom." "Come quickly." The phone nearly slipped from her hand. Emily desperately gripped it tighter. Her heart was pounding, and she could barely breathe. Was this someone's cruel joke? Looking out the window, the full moon cast a pale blue light over the entire garden. And there, beside the old swing, stood a figure. Emily, still clutching the phone, stumbled toward the kitchen door. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely grasp the doorknob. After taking several deep breaths, she finally managed to open the door. The warm night breeze caressed her cheeks. She took one step, then another across the lawn. In the moonlight, the figure became gradually clearer. Emily's feet moved toward the shadow as if of their own accord. There stood a boy who looked somehow familiar. 5 years had transformed her 8-year-old son into a 13-year-old boy. But those blue eyes were unmistakably Michael's. "Michael, is it really you?" Emily's voice was hoarse, and tears streamed down her cheeks. In the moonlight, tears also glistened on the boy's face. "Mom." Michael took a step forward. Emily, forgetting herself, ran to him and held him tightly. Warm. A definite presence. Not an illusion. The body temperature of her living, existing son. Why, where? The shock was too great to form proper sentences. She could only embrace her son, who should have been lost, and confirm his existence with her whole body. Michael's body was thin and bony. However, he had definitely grown. He was now as tall as Emily's shoulders. Just seeing his appearance made her acutely feel the passage of these 5 years. "Mom, Michael's voice trembled. Emily held her son's face in both hands and looked at him intently. In the moonlight, Michael's eyes held an indescribable mixture of fear and relief. "Grandma knows everything." As soon as he spoke those words, Michael's body began to tremble minutely. Emily held her son even tighter. Something terrible had happened. And Grace was at the center of it. That intuition sent a chill down Emily's spine. The swing creaked in the night wind. In Emily's mind, Past events flashed by like a series of images. Grace's cold gaze, Caitlin's complex expression, and the blood found by the creek. Everything pointed to something. However, the truth was far beyond Emily's imagination. "Michael, let's go inside. Aren't you cold? I'll make you something warm," Emily said, desperately trying to steady her trembling voice. Right now, the priority was getting him to a safe place. She needed to tell James in the study. And the police too. But there was something to do before that. "Mom, I'm scared." Michael's voice was hoarse and thin. Emily gently stroked her son's hair and held him tightly once more. "It's all right. I won't let anyone near you anymore. I'll protect you." Under the moonlight, mother and son stood embracing for a long time. Michael sat on the living room sofa, clutching a cup of hot cocoa in both hands. Tears glistened in his eyes at the sweet aroma he hadn't tasted in so long. James had contacted the police, and they were on their way. Emily sat next to her son, her hand on his thin shoulder. Michael's body was still trembling slightly. Even with a blanket, the trembling wouldn't stop. "Just tell us what you can," Emily said gently. She softly wrapped her hands around her trembling son's. Michael took a deep breath and slowly began to speak. His voice occasionally faltered. "That day, on my way home from school, Grandma's car stopped. She smiled kindly like always and asked, 'Want to go buy some candy?' In the black Cadillac, Grandma showed her usual smile. But once I got in the car, suddenly, Aunt Caitlin pressed a cloth against me from behind." Michael's voice shook. He took a sip of cocoa, wiped his mouth with trembling hands, and continued. "When I came to, I was in Grandma's basement. It was like an old air raid shelter. There were no windows, and it had a thick iron door. For the first few days, I kept screaming. But no one could hear my voice." Grace had apparently prepared that room over many years. The walls were thick, with perfect soundproofing that prevented voices from escaping. It was equipped with basic necessities: a single bed, study desk, bookshelf, and small bathroom, with pale blue wallpaper on the walls. It was a space seemingly designed to hide someone long-term. The lighting was constantly artificial fluorescent light, making it difficult to distinguish between day and night. Grandma brought meals at set times every day. She made proper food, meals considering nutritional balance, and sometimes even my favorite desserts. But she kept saying, "If I let you out, it will hurt your mother." She'd say, "This is for your sake, for the family's sake." Grace had provided Michael with thorough basic education. She gave him age-appropriate textbooks, workbooks, classic literature, introductory science books, and other rich educational materials, sometimes acting as a teacher herself. However, behind these actions lurked a twisted love and obsession. Grandma always said, "You're a special child, so we must preserve the pure bloodline." She called Mom an outsider. Someone who pollutes our blood. Between lessons, she would endlessly talk about the family history and its importance. Michael struggled with his words as he spoke of Grace's abnormal obsession. The Williams family history, the purity of the bloodline passed down through generations, and the importance of preserving it. It was a manic notion that went beyond mere family affection. Caitlin also regularly visited the basement. Though she showed hesitation at first, she gradually came to accept Grace's actions. For Caitlin, who struggled with infertility, Michael's presence became something special. Sometimes she acted like a mother, sometimes like a sister. Aunt Caitlin would sometimes cry and say, "I wanted a child too." But in front of Grandma, she'd act strong. Sometimes she'd read to me or help with homework. But there was always something dark in her eyes. The 5 years of confinement were managed with a military-like strict schedule. Wake up at 7 a.m., breakfast at 8, morning study time. After lunch, studies continued, with limited exercise time in the evening. Contact with the outside world was completely cut off, with no TV, radio, or cell phone allowed. Exercise was limited to calisthenics in the confined basement space. He was never allowed to breathe outside air. I was always waiting for a chance to escape. But Grandma was cautious. She always wore the key around her neck and never took it off. Sometimes I could hear sounds from upstairs. The sounds of normal life. But to me, it seemed like a distant world. The turning point came 3 days ago. Grace, absorbed in tending to her roses in the garden, accidentally dropped the basement key. Usually, she would have noticed immediately, but that day she was unusually troubled by a migraine, and her usual vigilance had weakened. When I found the key, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. But I didn't use it right away. I waited until night when Grandma wouldn't notice. I knew that because of the medicine she took before bed, she'd been having trouble sleeping. Michael escaped in the dead of night when no one was around. Using the moonlight as his guide, he took familiar roads and contacted Emily from a public phone. "But I'm still scared," Michael continued in a trembling voice. "Grandma said if anything happened, she would harm Mom. She warned me many times. If you can't keep this family's secret." Emily held her son tightly. Grace's twisted obsession, Caitlin's guilt as an accomplice. And above all, the reality of having her own son stolen for 5 years. Everything was about to come to light. That truth was more cruel than imagined. "It's okay now," Emily said firmly. "I won't let anyone take you away. Never." Just then, the doorbell rang. The police had arrived. They knew it would be a long night ahead. However, Emily no longer felt fear in her heart. There was only a strong determination to reveal this truth and protect her son. Michael gripped Emily's hand tightly and nodded slightly. A new battle for mother and son was about to begin. The police investigation proceeded swiftly. Based on Michael's testimony, late that night, police officers with a search warrant raided Grace's mansion. Grace was arrested in her bedroom, and Caitlin was secured in an adjacent room. Both complied without resistance, as if they had been expecting it. James watched the entire process at the police station with a frozen expression. His heart seemed unable to accept the horrific acts committed by his real mother and sister. When the basement was discovered, even the investigators were taken aback. Perfect soundproofing, surveillance cameras, emergency supplies. Everything testified to planned confinement. Among the seized evidence was Grace's meticulously kept diary. It contained detailed records from the planning to execution of the plan. "I could never accept his marriage to an unsuitable woman for this family lineage," Grace spoke with dignity during questioning. "The Williams family bloodline has been preserved for generations. I couldn't let an outsider of unknown origin like Emily raise this family's heir. This was a necessary measure to protect the family line." That twisted love materialized in Michael's kidnapping. The blood by the creek had also been carefully planned. They had used previously collected blood to stage an accidental death. I have always devoted myself to this child's education. As an heir worthy of our pure bloodline, Grace's voice carried an almost manic pride. Caitlin's confession was also shocking. I couldn't have children. But with Michael. I thought if I followed Mother's plan, I could have a family too, her voice mixed with regret and resignation. At first, I opposed it. But Mother said, "This is to protect the family." I was weak. Every time I saw my brother's happy family, I felt like my chest would burst with jealousy. At trial, Grace was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Caitlin to 10 years. In explaining the sentence, the judge severely criticized the victim being a minor, the high degree of planning and extreme maliciousness, and above all, the despicable nature of exploiting family bonds. Grace's expression didn't change even when hearing the sentence. Until the end, she maintained that this was a necessary choice to protect the family. Meanwhile, Caitlin, in tears at court, offered words of apology to Emily and Michael. I could only follow Mother's words. But I know that was wrong. Michael, I'm truly sorry for taking 5 years of your life away. This incident left deep emotional scars on James. Unable to accept his mother and sister's actions, he could barely speak for several days. At night, he would shut himself in his study, and occasionally the sound of him hitting the wall could be heard. What a foolish son I am," he would mutter repeatedly. I didn't notice Mother's abnormality. I couldn't see Caitlin's suffering. And above all, I couldn't protect my wife and son. One night, nearly crushed by guilt, James finally knelt before Emily and Michael, and with a choked voice, apologized. I should have noticed. Mother's abnormal obsession, my sister's unnatural behavior. I pretended not to see it all. My weakness caused your suffering. I'm truly sorry. From now on, I will definitely protect you both. Even at the cost of my life. Emily quietly nodded at those sincere words. While there was certainly anger and disappointment, they needed to build a new relationship to move forward as a family. It's not your fault. Let's start a new life, the three of us. We still have plenty of time ahead. Michael, too, was gradually beginning to recover his daily life. While receiving psychological counseling, he was starting to consider returning to school. Though the 5-year gap was significant, his strength and his family's support were slowly healing those wounds. When he suffered from nightmares at night, his parents would stay close, embracing him warmly. James, as a father, was also changing gradually. He would play catch with his son on holidays and help with homework after dinner. While this time was far from making up for the lost 5 years, it marked definite steps forward. 6 months after the incident, Emily's family decided to start a new life in California. James chose to change jobs, selecting work that would allow him to prioritize family time. Their new house had large windows that let warm sunlight flood the rooms. Trees chosen by Michael were planted in the garden, and the three of them tended to them together on weekends. "Mom, can I go to the park today?" There was no longer fear in Michael's voice when he asked this question. Emily felt genuine happiness as she watched her son's growth. The painful past would never disappear. However, the happiness they had gained by overcoming it was irreplaceable. "This view from the window marks the beginning of our new life." Emily whispered this while watching Michael and her husband. Parting with the past also meant the beginning of new bonds. Their story as a real family, woven by the three of them, was about to begin. Under the blue California sky, various flowers bloomed wildly in the garden of their new home. While preparing weekend brunch, Emily watched through the window as Michael read a book on the terrace. 1 year after the incident, she felt deep peace in this quiet moment of daily life. "Mom, look how well this rose is growing." Michael proudly pointed to a corner of the garden. The miniature rose he had planted himself was blooming with small but vibrant pink flowers. Though meetings with trauma care specialists continued, Michael's recovery was progressing faster than doctors had predicted. At his new school, he was gradually warming up to children his age, and consistently achieved top grades, especially in science class. The science books he had read during his confinement had become his strength. "It's growing beautifully." Emily sat down beside her son and embraced his shoulders. "Maybe it's because you water it every day." While he was less fearful than before, he still occasionally suffered from nightmares. On such nights, he would knock on his parents' bedroom door. Now, he no longer hesitated to ask for help. This was significant progress. James, too, was dedicating himself fully to deepening family relationships. He switched to remote work at an IT company, converting commuting time into family time. Every weekend, he would play catch with Michael, and after dinner, the three would go for walks together. While they couldn't recover lost time, they could build new memories. "It's almost lunchtime." Michael looked up at the sky. The sunlight illuminated his growing profile. At 14, he was beginning to transform from a boy into a young man. Emily sighed quietly. Grace and Caitlin's trial had ended, and both continued serving their sentences in prison. There had been several requests for visits, but Michael said he wasn't ready to meet them yet. His parents quietly accepted this. Everything would proceed at their son's pace. There was no need to rush. "I made French toast for brunch today, Dad's favorite." Emily stood up, and Michael followed. "Want to help?" "Yes." With a bright response, her son headed to the kitchen. Life in their new home was slowly but surely healing the three of them. The light streaming through the wide windows, the fragrance of garden flowers, peaceful time spent as a family. They knew firsthand how precious these ordinary moments were. "Hey, Mom." Michael paused his cooking and looked at Emily with a serious expression. "You know, I want to become a psychological counselor in the future. I want to help children who've had experiences like mine." Emily felt quiet emotion at her son's determination. As a mother, she couldn't help but feel proud of her son's strength in trying to transform his painful experience into power to help others. "That's a wonderful dream," she smiled gently. "We'll support you with all our might." On the terrace, James looked up from his weekend newspaper, warmly watching the mother and son cooking together. Their conversation brought a natural smile to his face. These ordinary moments spent in this house were their treasure. The past would never disappear. However, the happiness they had gained by overcoming it was irreplaceable. The new story woven by the three of them had only just begun.